Imagine waking up every morning, making your coffee, kissing your family goodbye, and walking out the door as one person. Then, somewhere between the front step and wherever you were going, becoming another. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally, clinically, deliberately. There is a stretch of road on Long Island called Ocean Parkway. It runs like a thin gray spine between the Atlantic Ocean and the Great South Bay, water on both sides, sky above, and on most mornings, almost no one around. It is the kind of place that feels at the edge of the world, even though it sits less than 40 miles from Midtown Manhattan. The kind of place where the wind comes off the ocean with nothing to slow it down, and the beach grass bends flat, and in winter the light is so cold and colorless it feels like a photograph of a place rather than the place itself. If you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you are in the right place. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's dive into the story. It was here, beginning in December of 2010, that law enforcement started finding remains. Not one set, not two, eventually 10. Scattered across that thin strip of barrier island over the course of months, some buried in the scrub, some closer to the road, all of them telling the same quiet and devastating story, that someone had been here before the investigators, many times, over many years, and had never been caught. For over a decade, the case went cold in the way the worst cases do, not forgotten, but unsolved. The families of the victims waited. Law enforcement followed leads that dissolved. The media covered it in cycles, intense attention, then silence, then renewed attention when something new emerged. And the person responsible, according to prosecutors, did not go quiet during that time. He watched. His name was Rex Heuermann. He was a licensed architect working out of a firm in Midtown Manhattan. He had a house in Massapequa Park, a quiet, entirely ordinary suburban neighborhood, less than 20 miles from where those remains were found. He had a wife, children, a career that had spanned decades. He attended professional meetings. He paid his taxes. He walked through the world as a man who had built a life, because from the outside, that is precisely what he appeared to have done. Forensic psychology has a name for what we are about to examine. We call it compartmentalization. And in most people, in healthy minds, it functions as a protective mechanism, a way of separating the stress of work from the warmth of home, a way of holding grief in a manageable container so that life can continue functioning around it. It is not pathological. It is, in many ways, deeply human. But in certain psychological structures, in minds organized around concealment rather than protection, compartmentalization does not serve the self, it serves the secret. Rex Heuermann was arrested in July of 2023. He was charged in connection with the deaths of 4 of the victims found at Gilgo Beach: Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainard-Barnes. He has pleaded not guilty. The legal process is ongoing, and he is, under the full protection of the law, presumed innocent until a court determines otherwise. But the behavioral record, the documented trail of how this man moved through the world for over a decade while this case remained open, that is already public. That is already extraordinary. And that is what we are here to examine. Because forensic psychology is not only interested in what happened, it is consumed by how. How does a human being hold that kind of interior weight for that long and walk through a suburban neighborhood and sit at a professional desk in Manhattan and follow news coverage of the very investigation that allegedly surrounds him and never visibly fracture? That is the question. And the answer lives in the architecture of the mind itself.
Rex Heuermann built a career around structure, literally. Architecture is a profession that does not forgive imprecision. It demands the ability to hold multiple complex systems simultaneously in your mind, to plan across long timelines, to understand how components that appear separate on paper must ultimately function together as a single coherent whole. You must be able to see what something will look like long before it exists. You must be able to identify stress points in a structure before they become failures. Forensic behavioral analysts have noted, across a range of cases involving long-term concealment, that certain professional contexts can mirror and reinforce pre-existing psychological tendencies. When a profession rewards sustained compartmentalization, the disciplined separation of distinct systems, the management of what is visible versus what is structural, the presentation of a clean surface above complex and hidden foundations, and the individual already has a psychological architecture organized around those same principles, the two can reinforce each other in ways that are, in retrospect, deeply revealing. That is not a diagnosis. Rex Heuermann has not been clinically assessed publicly, and no responsible forensic analysis claims certainty about interior states from behavioral observation alone. What it is a pattern, and patterns are exactly what this discipline is built to read. There is a documented phenomenon in forensic behavioral science, sometimes described as injecting oneself into the investigation. It refers to a pattern of behavior observed across multiple case types in which an individual with some form of culpable knowledge of a crime does not retreat from the investigation. Instead, they engage with it. They follow it publicly. They insert themselves into the social orbit of discussions about it. They attend community responses. They track media coverage with a consistency and intensity that goes beyond ordinary public interest. This behavior is not random. From a forensic standpoint, it serves several psychological functions simultaneously. It provides real-time intelligence, a way of knowing how close or how far the investigation is from the truth. It provides a form of control, the ability to monitor the threat. And it feeds something that forensic psychologists have come to understand as a need for proximity to the thing that defines the hidden self. The case was not just something that happened and was then left behind. For someone engaged in this pattern, it becomes a fixed point, something returned to, something that cannot be fully left alone. Accounts from the investigation suggest Heuermann's engagement with the Gilgo Beach case online was not occasional or passing. It was extensive, sustained, organized in a way that reflected not impulsive curiosity, but systematic preoccupation over years. In behavioral science, that kind of sustained digital preoccupation tells us something very specific about psychological need. The mind is not moving on, it is orbiting. Whatever the internal narrative is, it requires ongoing engagement to remain coherent. The compulsion to return repeatedly, methodically to the same subject over years is not the behavior of a mind that has separated itself from an event. It is the behavior of a mind that cannot. And yet, to the people around him, colleagues, neighbors, the ordinary social world of his daily life, Rex Heuermann registered as unremarkable. That word appears again and again in accounts from people who knew him in a surface capacity. Unremarkable, quiet, professional, ordinary. And forensic psychologists who work in this space hear that word so consistently in cases involving long-term concealment that it has become, paradoxically, a signal rather than an absence of one.
Rex Heuermann has pleaded not guilty. He will face the full due process of the legal system, and nothing in this analysis presumes a verdict that has not been reached. The courts will do what courts do: weigh evidence, examine testimony, apply the law with the precision and deliberateness it demands. But the forensic psychological record is not waiting for that verdict. The behavioral architecture is already documented, and it raises a question that goes beyond this case, a question that behavioral science has been sitting with for decades and has not fully resolved. How does a human being hold that kind of interior darkness, sustained, organized, hidden in plain sight, for that long inside a life that registered to everyone around it as completely ordinary? The research is careful here because the answer is uncomfortable. The human capacity for self-compartmentalization is more profound than most people understand. In trauma survivors, it can be the difference between functioning and collapse, an act of psychological survival so complete that the traumatic material is genuinely inaccessible to the conscious self during daily functioning. The brain is extraordinarily capable of building walls that hold. In individuals with certain personality structures, those that include a significantly diminished capacity for empathy, an elevated baseline comfort with sustained deception, and a fundamental need for psychological control over their environment and the people within it, that same capacity does not serve survival, it serves concealment. And the critical distinction is this: in those structures, the hidden self and the presented self are not experienced as being in conflict. They are simply in different rooms. There is no persistent cognitive dissonance pressing toward resolution, no accumulating guilt demanding expression, no sleepless nights in which the walls between the rooms grow thin. The architecture holds because it was built to hold, reinforced over years, maintained with the same deliberate precision applied to every other structure in that person's life. That is what makes these cases so deeply disturbing to study. Not their frequency, they are rare, but their invisibility. The fact that the warning signs, when they are visible at all, are legible only in retrospect, that the person capable of this level of concealment moves through the ordinary world with such practiced unremarkability that the world simply does not see. Right up until the moment it does. And at the end of every forensic analysis, underneath the behavioral frameworks, the psychological profiles, the documented patterns, and the clinical terminology, there are 4 women whose names deserve to be spoken clearly and without reduction. Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Lynn Costello, Maureen Brainard-Barnes. They were not case study subjects. They were not details in someone else's psychological architecture. They were people, fully, completely, irreducibly people, who had families who waited and who deserved far better than the years it took to get here. Whatever the final legal outcome of these proceedings, their names belong at the center of this story, not at the edges, not in the footnotes. Every forensic analysis must begin with the humanity of the people at its heart, and every honest one must return there at the end before it closes. The mind we examine today was extraordinary in its concealment. The case that exposed it was extraordinary in its patience, and the question it leaves us with about the human capacity to build interior worlds invisible to everyone around them is one that forensic psychology will be sitting with long after this verdict is delivered. Because the architecture of a hidden self does not collapse when it is finally seen. It simply stops being hidden. And that is where we leave you tonight, behind the glass, watching, thinking, asking the question that every episode of this channel is built around, not just what happened, but why and how, and what it tells us about the extraordinary, terrifying complexity of the human mind at its darkest. Stay sharp. I will see you in the next one. If this story moved you, challenged your thinking, or opened a door in your understanding of forensic psychology, subscribe to Zorivox Chronicles. New episodes every week. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which behavioral marker stayed with you longest after this one ended? The conversation begins below.